Then he said as he was walking off, "Now live up to it. The pressure with Bruce Benson never stops." But I want to thank him, our great chancellor. There were two Democrats, I think, there might have been more than that, but two that I recall, that went and testified at the State Education Commission to say that we thought Bruce Benson should be the next chancellor of the University of Colorado. One was John Hickenlooper, he's now governor. One was me. And I couldn't be prouder to have done that, because Bruce has done, not just fulfilled what we thought that he would do, but in this incredibly difficult time provided extraordinary leadership to the university, and I deeply appreciate that. Chancellor Martin, Chancellor Block, and President McPherson, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I want to welcome all of you, especially Secretary Gates, in advance of his remarks. I want to congratulate the APLU on your 125th anniversary, at least for this conference, and for raising awareness about the 150th anniversary of the Morrill Act. I want to thank you all for your commitment to advancing knowledge in our country and to educating our future leaders, inventors, and researchers. And mostly, I'd like to join Bruce in welcoming you to Colorado. This is an incredible state. And if I look a little bit down in the mouth today, it's because after 6 weeks of being on recess in the state of Colorado, I get to go back to Washington, D.C. tomorrow. All summer long, we have three little girls. The oldest is now 13. She just turned 13, 11, and 8. And all summer long, the then 12-year-old and the 11-year-old were at each other like this. So much so that I began to refer to them as feenagers, fake teenagers. I arrived home from this recess, and they were doing it in the living room, just nagging each other, so much so that the 8th grader looked over at me, or the 8-year-old looked over at me and said, "Now you see what I have to put up with." And I said to her, "Listen, sister, let me tell you what I have to put up with on a daily basis in Washington." Last year, actually, the oldest, the one that's now a real teenager, against all of my advice, had the opportunity to go to Harry Potter World with her mother. And the two others were sent to Washington, D.C. to spend the week with me. I was incredibly excited. You can imagine how they felt, because they were not going to Harry Potter World. But I was excited because I'd have the opportunity to have them in Washington and see what I do on a daily basis, because they really don't know what I do 4 days a week. So the first day they were there, I made a terrible mistake, which was to force them to come to every single meeting that I had. They went on strike the rest of the week. But one of those meetings was in Harry Reid's very fancy conference room in the Capitol. The majority leader's office. It has tile mosaics and oil paintings and chandeliers and views of the Capitol Mall. And we were having a briefing on China. There were about 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. We were going to take a trip to China. So the Commerce Department came over, and the State Department came over, and the CIA came over, and they were all briefing us. And 40 minutes into this meeting, Dick Durbin, who's from Illinois, nudges me in the ribs like this and points to my then 6-year-old, I guess, daughter, Anne, who was standing in the opposite corner of Harry Reid's conference room, holding up a handmade sign that said, "I am bored." B-O-A-R-D. Which, as her former school superintendent, cut me to the quick. But I think little Ann Bennett really captured extremely well the feeling of people in the country about the conversation that we're having or not having in Washington, D.C. And this is a conversation that we all need to change, because we face, among other things, and I don't have time today, and you guys have a much better speaker than I, to talk about all the things, but among other things, very significant structural problems in this economy. Because in the last economic recovery and this economic recovery, economic growth decoupled from job growth and wage growth for the first time in the nation's history. I didn't bring my charts today because I thought I'd spare you, but the first one would have been a line that shows that our gross domestic product is today higher than it was when we went into the worst recession since the Great Depression. The next line is the productivity index, the measure of our efficiency and productivity as an economy, which has almost gone straight up since the early 90s because of our response to competition from China and India, because of our use of technology to make things more efficient, and because of the recession itself, which indeed drove the line straight up as firms tried to figure out how to get through this recession with fewer people. But at the same time, median family income has fallen for the last 20 years or so, and we've got 23 or 24 million people who are underemployed or unemployed in this economy. So the question is, in my mind, how do you realign that? How do you realign economic growth with job growth and wage growth so we can have a rising middle class and so we can find ourselves in the position of not having the worst income inequality that we've had since 1928, which is where we find ourselves today. And I think there are a lot of things we can do. We certainly can invest in our infrastructure. We certainly could create an immigration policy that actually wasn't at war with our economy and who we are as Americans. But I think the two most important things we can do is whatever it is we can do to create the most innovative ecosystem in the world, because it's businesses that are started next week and the week after that, the firms that are growing out of our universities in Colorado and across the country as we think about how to do more robust technology transfer, for example. It's those firms that are going to create jobs here in the United States and are going to create rising wages in the United States. It's the 650 bioscience firms in Colorado that pay an average salary of $71,000 that are closely associated with the work that's going on at the University of Colorado, who now have the benefit of a reauthorized Food and Drug Administration that's actually applying 21st century science to the question of how to approve breakthrough technologies and not 20th century science to those kinds of questions. It's those firms that are going to drive that innovation. I want to talk a minute about education. I'll come back to this. But in my mind, education is the other key here. You know, the worst the unemployment rate ever got in the worst recession since the Great Depression for people with a college degree in the United States of America was 4.5%. That is a pretty significant stress test of the value we place on a college degree, either because of what people have learned or, as I suspect, because of the proxy of that degree for the willingness of somebody to stick with the work that they're doing and therefore the notion that they're going to be a productive employee. But today in this country, if you're born into poverty, your chances of graduating with a college degree are roughly 9 in 100, which means that if we don't change our K-12 model of education, and if we don't make higher education more accessible than it is today, we're going to find ourselves with 91 of our young people born into poverty, constrained to the margin of the democracy and the margin of the economy before we even get started on the other stuff that we need to do. This is not a partisan observation, Bruce, this is a temporal observation. When George Bush, the son, became president, we led the world in the production of college graduates. And today, just 12 or 13 years later, we are 16th in the world. Not because we did anything differently, but because the rest of the world is thinking differently about what we face. This is what I hear about when I travel a state that's a third Republican, a third Democratic, and a third independent. Not the kinds of things you're watching on the cable television at night and not the stuff that we're hearing on the Senate floor. And I want to encourage you not to accept the politics that we're seeing back there, not to accept the political vocabulary that's going on back there, because this partisan fight, this left-right fight that you're all watching and that they're reporting on television, if you listen closely, it's going to be hard for you to hear any content in the ideas in this argument. What you've really got are a bunch of special interests masquerading as two political parties that are trying together to drag the country backward. The axis we should understand that we're on is not a left-right axis. It is a future versus past axis. And in my view, the inhabitants of the past understand that very well because they're fighting extremely hard to hold on to the benefits they acquired in the tax code and in the regulatory code and in the statute books, which might have made a lot of sense in the middle of the 20th century, but may not drive job growth and wage growth in the 21st century, and may not drive investment in public education, in basic science and basic research that have been so critical to this country's history and to our legacy to this world. You need to be voices for the future, and you naturally are because of the work that you do. That's the reason you do what you do. It's all about making sure that we provide more opportunity, not less, for the people that are coming after us. And if there are days when you think it's impossible, the example that was set by a president in an even more fractured environment than we face today, when he signed the Morrill Act in 1862 to create the land-grant universities, ought to be a pretty worthy example for us. Tomorrow I'm going back, as I said earlier, and we face this fiscal cliff at the end of the year. I've spent the last 2 years working with the so-called Gang of Eight, a group of 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, trying to figure out whether there's a bipartisan path forward. Spent 11 months with my budget staff, essentially merged with that great former university president Lamar Alexander's budget staff, to see whether we can create a process that will allow us to avoid this fiscal cliff. But the time has come for us to address these fiscal matters. And for the people that I represent, our inability to address them so far has become emblematic of our dysfunction. You know, it's hard to have a conversation about energy or about immigration or about education when it doesn't appear to them that we can actually get past the political games to solve this fiscal challenge that we face. And the only way we're going to solve it is in a bipartisan manner. You know, we need to be able to say to people, we materially address the problem. That means, in my mind, that we take $4 trillion out over the next 10 years in a ratio of about 2.5 times cuts to 1 part revenue. We need to be able to say that we're all in it together. That means that we need to think about reforming. We need to actually reform our entitlements while we raise revenue at the same time. And it needs to, by definition, be bipartisan. Because nobody believes, at least out here, in either party's go-it-alone approach on this question around how to fix this. And I think that if we just think about the example that's been set by generations before us, if we focus not on the special interests that surround us and will always be there, but for this moment, that we really do focus on the kids and the needs of the next generation, and the reason why we have to give them some hope that they're not going to have to pay these bills that we were unable to pay, and that we were also managing to construct a politics that's actually worthy of the aspirations we have for our kids and our grandkids, and said that we are simultaneously going to figure out how to put our fiscal house in order, but make sure that we continue to create the vital investments that we've made historically in higher education, in K-12 education, in the science and research I mentioned earlier. We're going to be just fine. And the thing that you need to remember is that you don't need to accept what people say to you back there. If it sounds crazy to you, it probably is. And what I want to say is that we need your voices and your examples as we move into this political discussion, because there is no doubt in my mind that if you're present, the quality of our work is going to be dramatically improved. Thank you so much for everything you do. Thank you for coming here to Colorado, and I look forward to hearing what you come up with during the course of the discussions you have here. Bruce, thank you for inviting me. Appreciate it. Thanks.